How can a simple toothbrush help you in your case interviews? This is not a video on how having cleaner teeth will help you make a better impression on your interviewer. Instead, it's about having great frameworks. Have you ever noticed that most candidates you do cases with will have the same frameworks and the same issues for the same case, or even for different cases? Have you ever feared that your interviewer might think the same of your frameworks, that your frameworks are the same as everyone else, that they're generic? In this video, I'm gonna show you a 2-minute test so you can see if your frameworks are the generic, boring frameworks that get most people rejected from case interviews, or if you have the insightful, specific frameworks that you need to get an offer in a top consulting firm. Also, I'm gonna show you how to make your frameworks more specific and more insightful without needing to learn any new frameworks, any new lists of questions or anything. We call this technique the toothbrush test, hence the toothbrush. We've created this quick test to help candidates like you understand if you need more insight in your frameworks, and if so, how to do it. I have a previous video that shows the 3 shifts that you need to make in your frameworks so that you can quickly make them much better. This video is a deep dive into the second technique of that video. But before we do so, I have a secret to tell you. There's an art and a science to make your structures insightful and to show business sense. So let's talk about the art and science of showing business sense and being insightful in your case interviews. The art part is where everyone focuses their efforts on. These are the unique ideas and hypotheses that only you bring to the case, that other candidates don't bring and that are relevant. So just to give you an example, let's say you're solving an airline case and you're working on how to increase the number of flights per airplane, so improving their efficiency. One example of a unique hypothesis that shows great business sense that most other candidates won't bring up and that may be relevant to the case is to say that when you increase the number of flights per airplane, you may increase lost luggage and have customers less satisfied, less happy with your service. And that increase of lost luggage may come from tighter operations, less room for mistakes. Now, this is an example of a art type of business sense. You bring something to the table that you've read somewhere, that came from your work experience, that you've seen in a case you've done. So doing more cases, if done right, may help you with that. But there's a science part of showing business sense. And the science part is easier. It is to be more specific. So you don't have to have read anything, you don't have to have work experience, you don't have to have done a lot of cases to be more specific when you speak. And the reason is that this works, the reason that being more specific works, is that being generic is never insightful. Being generic is never insightful. If you say that increasing flights per airplane might cause trouble or might cause angry customers, and you don't say how will it cause trouble, why it will cause angry customers, I don't know if you're being brilliant or not as an interviewer. I don't know if you're trying to bullshit me. I just don't understand your reasoning because you're being too generic. It kind of sounds like you're using theory or reading from a textbook. You read in a textbook that, well, more efficiency might cause more mistakes, but you don't explain how. So you're being too generic to be useful. Improving the art part is hard, it's tough, it takes experience, it takes time. But improving the science part, which is where no one's focusing on, is easy, just be more specific. Plus, if you focus on the art part, but you're not specific, you're not telling me exactly what you mean, you're being too generic, I can't see as an interviewer the brilliance of what you're saying. So all that effort here is going to waste because you're not being specific enough. So being specific is the #1 thing you can do to make your structures more insightful, to show more business sense to your interviewer. Which kind of brings me to the next question. And this question is, are your structures specific enough? When you solve a case, are you doing specific structures? And if they are they specific enough so that you can impress your interviewer, so that you can get the offer? If your structures are like most candidates out there, I want to analyze customers. I want to know what are the complementary goods or products to this product or service. I want to know the capabilities and expertise of our competitors. If your structures are like that, if they sound like they come from a case interview book, you're just reading out of the book, then you'll not only bore your interviewer to death, but you also likely get rejected. Like 95% of the candidates who apply to McKinsey, to Bain, to BCG, to top consulting firms like that. Now here's the good news. The good news is you don't have to forget all the frameworks that you've learned. You don't have to learn new frameworks. That's not the solution. For a lot of candidates, the solution is to learn to be more specific. As we've discussed, there's an art and science to show insight, to show business sense. And while the art part is important, the science part is easier and it's much more impactful. And it is to be more specific. But before you jump into a journey of being more specific, you first need to know if you really need to improve that. And if you do need to improve that, you need to know how much. And for that, we've developed the toothbrush test. It's a simple test that measures how specific, how insightful your structures are. And you'll take 5 minutes to learn it and 2 minutes to run the test in your structures and know how much more insightful you need to be and how to do that. So the toothbrush test is a simple but powerful test so that you can know with 95% confidence how insightful your structures are, how much business sense are you bringing to the table. You can do that without paying for an expensive coach, and more important, you can do that before you get that feedback call telling you that you didn't get the offer, you were not going to the next round because you weren't insightful enough. So you can use the toothbrush test when practicing. And the test is pretty simple. You just count the number of issues, the number of bullet points in your structure, in your issue tree, that could not be used as phrased in a case on a completely different industry. For example, the toothbrush industry, and that's where the name of the test comes from. If you can use these issues in a case on toothbrushes and your case is on something else, then these issues do not pass the test. So let's just give an example. Let's say you're solving a case on the automotive industry and you ask about the capabilities and resources of your competitors. When you phrase it like that, it doesn't pass the toothbrush test because you could ask the same thing in a case on the toothbrush industry. So if you had a case on the toothbrush industry, you can say, well, I want to know the capabilities and the resources of my competitors. What that means is that your structure is not specific enough. So here's what you could do instead. You could say, well, I want to know the capabilities and the resources of our competitors. The main capabilities that I'm looking for here are R&D capabilities and the marketing capabilities. And the main resources that I'm looking for are manufacturing and supply chain resources. We're asking for the same general thing, but I made it much more specific. And now I cannot use the same phrasing, the same specificities in a case in a different industry. And what that makes is that brings insight to the table. It shows the interviewer you're thinking about that specific problem, and it shows you're not just memorized and reading in your mind from a case interview book. Once you've done that with one issue in your framework, you can do that with other issues in your framework, and you can do this test with all the issues in your framework. And if you do that, you're gonna find a percentage of issues that did pass this test, that were so specific that you could not use them in a case in a different industry. That's your toothbrush test score, your TTS. Now, why the hell would you do that? You do that so that you can measure how specific you are and if you're doing well enough. From experience, we've observed that if you get a TTS of at least 40%, so 4 out of 10 issues are so specific that you could not use in a case in a different industry, then that's kind of the minimum to be perceived as insightful, to be perceived as bringing business sense to the table. What you're really aiming for here is 60%. If 6 out of 10 issues that you bring are specific enough for that client, for that industry, for that case, then we're talking about a candidate that is going to be perceived by most interviewers as pretty insightful, as bringing business sense, as knowing what they're talking about. Now, does that mean that the art part doesn't count? Does that mean that the quality of the issues that you bring to the table don't matter? No, that's simply a guideline. But what it means is that if you're not bringing most of your issues with specificity enough to show the quality of your business sense, of your insight, then your interviewer is never going to see this. And honestly, if 6 out of 10 issues that you bring to the table are very specific, you're probably going to have at least 1 or 2 of them so specific and so different from what other candidates are saying that you're likely to hear back that, wow, that issue that you said in your framework is something that I've never heard before, and I've applied this case to over 100 candidates in your feedback call. So let me show this in practice by bringing you a few examples. Actually, I'm bringing a couple of examples. One of a structure that is common to a lot of candidates with a very low TTS, and one of a structure with a 40% TTS, just so you can see the difference. So suppose you got this case in a case interview. Should a global insurance company enter the African market? Now I'm going to show you a typical framework of a beginner, someone who has done 10 to 15 cases. Basic structure, 3 C's plus the product category. If you go through and read all the issues, and we're going to do that with a few of them in the next few minutes, it's almost a copy-paste of case interview books. Now, that's okay when starting out just to get a hang of how to do cases, but it's not okay to go to an interview going with such generic issues as the ones in this framework. And you know what frustrates me is when I see candidates, and I see many of them, who focus on just doing more cases, and then after their 30th case or their 40th case, they're still doing frameworks like this. Generic categories, generic issues, because they didn't focus on skill building. Anyway, let's analyze this. I'm gonna have for each issue if it passes the toothbrush test, and I'm not gonna do it every single issue so that I'm not wasting my time or your time here, but I'm gonna look at each issue as if it were used in a case for which the question were, should a toothbrush company enter the African market? And because insurance is completely different than toothbrushes, if the issues work for both, they're too generic. So let's examine each issue. Issue number 1. How large is the insurance market in Africa and how much does it grow? Does this issue pass the toothbrush test? Nope. I mean, of course, there's the word insurance there, but if I exchanged it with how large is the toothbrush market in Africa and how much does it grow, it doesn't pass the test. You can use the same phrasing, just changing, of course, the industry in the other case, so you're not bringing anything specific to the table. What are the customer segments and how price sensitive they are? If you guessed no, you guessed right. You can use that for every case, so you shouldn't use that phrase like that in any case. I mean, you can use a few times, but you need specificity to bring more to the table. How do customers decide between insurance providers? Again, no. You could have said, how do customers decide between toothbrush brands, which is the equivalent, and you would not be insightful because it's just not specific enough. What distribution channels do they use? You guessed it, no. Now, I'm not going to waste more of your time here. I'm just going to show all of these. And the answer to almost all of this is no, because I basically copy-pasted this from a case interview book. But there's one that has a yes, so let's analyze that. What types of insurance services do we offer? For example, industrial insurance, automotive insurance, house insurance, life insurance, etc. Now, if I've said what types of toothbrush do we offer, then it would be too generic, right? If you just said the first part, then it's too generic. But because I gave examples to the interviewer, I showed to the interviewer that I know there is industrial insurance, there is automotive insurance, there is life insurance, and that matters to the case. I'm showing them that I'm thinking about this problem, so I got a yes on the toothbrush test. So here's one insight. One way to get more specific is to give examples. Now, the rest of this structure is really, really boring. If you want, pause the video and read it. You're going to see it's a copy-paste. It's boring. It's saying nothing about insurance. It's saying nothing about Africa. It's saying nothing about global companies. It's just a copy-paste from the case interview book. And that's why this framework gets a toothbrush test score, a TTS of 8%. Only 1 out of 13 issues passes the test. So this is a framework that's typical of beginners. It's okay when you're a beginner. It's not okay to go to a case interview like that. And one way to indicate that is that the toothbrush test score is just too low. 8%. As I've said, you're aiming for at least 40%, preferably aiming for 60% or higher. Now, let's go to another structure. Let's go examine another structure with a 40% TTS, a 40% toothbrush test score. So you can see what the bare minimum looks like. Let's jump right into the case. So suppose the case question was a private jet maintenance company wants to enter the airliner maintenance market. How would you help them decide if they should do so? So here's the structure, and this is a framework that resembles that of an experienced candidate with a few months of practice under their belt. So it's a bit more sophisticated than the other one. It's one that would probably be pretty impressive for first round interviewers, but not guaranteed to. So let's do the same drill. Imagine this is a case on a toothbrush manufacturer trying to enter a market. And notice that here we're entering the mechanics of scoring a TTS. So you can do the same with your own frameworks. I'm going to go issue by issue on this one because it's going to be a lot more interesting than the other one, which was pretty generic. So let's talk about the customer thing first, and then competition, and then company. And notice that the categories are pretty standard here, but the specifics of the issues make this framework strong. So first one, how large is the airliner maintenance market and how much does it grow? So this obviously does not pass the toothbrush test. It's a pretty generic way to phrase it. It's a generic issue. You could do that for toothbrushes as well. What are the shares of each market segment? For example, urgent versus preventive maintenance. Maintenance by type of job. So for example, maintaining the wings of the airplane or the landing gear. By type of aircraft. So what are the shares of maintenance of the market by type of aircraft? So this passes the toothbrush test. Because I gave specifics, I told them I want to look at these specific market segments. Not necessarily just these ones, but I'm giving you examples that are specific to the airline maintenance industry. How do they contract the service, or how do our customers contract the service, and what drives their loyalty. So here, it's a meh. I'm not really sure if it passes the toothbrush test or not. I mean, toothbrush customers, they don't contract a service. And I guess some manufacturers or some toothbrush companies are worried about customer loyalty, but this is obviously much more important for aircraft maintenance. But I mean, a lot of industries, they work under contracts and are driven by loyalty. So I'm not really sure. I'm leaving it at that. How can we bargain power over leader airlines? So this is again a meh. I mean, in toothbrushes, you don't need bargaining power over your clients, but a lot of industries need bargaining power. So not really sure if it passes the test or not. Leaving at that. And later we're going to see, I'm going to calculate the score without considering this. So let's move on to the next one. How many competitors are there and what is their market share? This does not pass the toothbrush test. In which segments is each competitor strongest and why? Again, does not pass the toothbrush test. What are the largest contracts our competitors have with major airlines and what are their terms and conditions? So this one passes the toothbrush test because I'm not only talking about contracts in general, I'm talking about terms and conditions with major airlines. So I actually want to know in this market what are the terms and conditions, and I'm showing the interviewer that I know that these terms and conditions are important because depending on how you write up a contract for maintenance, the profitability and the dynamics of the business is completely different. Now, this would be much better if I gave examples of terms and conditions, but not necessarily. This already passes. What are the barriers to entry in this market? For example, getting contracts with major airlines, regulatory permits, being present in several airports. Again, the examples win here. If I just say barriers to entry, might as well read from Michael Porter's book, and then the consulting firm might as well hire Michael Porter, who's much smarter than me. But if I give specific examples of what could be barriers to entry in this industry, again, not necessarily all of them, but just examples of things that I would investigate if I were in a real project, this is much more specific. It's insightful. It shows businesses. I'm showing the interviewer that I know that for an airline maintenance company to operate well, they need to be present at the airports. They need to have regulatory permits and things like that. Let's move into company. Do we have expertise and the licenses to do airliner maintenance? Yes. Why? Well, again, the licenses thing is most important. Expertise is important as well. But the key here is bringing together expertise and licenses along with specific airliners. So notice the wording. An airliner is a different type of aircraft than a private jet. And I need to have expertise. I need to have the permits, the licenses to do that kind of maintenance. And this shows some businesses, at least shows that I'm aware that it's completely different to do maintenance for one type of aircraft or for the other. Can we adapt our operations to our customers' schedules? Yes, hugely important. Scheduling is so important in the airline business. If I'm working on a private jet, I can do maintenance overnight. I can do maintenance on the weekends when the rich owner is not using the aircraft, or even the corporation. I mean, they don't use it full time. However, in the airliner business, I need to know if I can do this maintenance quick because they will be expecting that from me as a maintenance provider. The quicker I make the maintenance, the more they can fly their airplanes, the more money they make. That's a key purchasing driver for them. If I explain this to the interviewer, even better. But just mentioning schedules will make your interviewer say, wow, this is something that not a lot of candidates mention, and it's really important. And I know it's important because I've worked in the airline industry. I'm not talking about me. I mean, I did do consulting projects for an airliner, but I'm talking about what's going on in your interviewer's head. Can we build the sales team required to get the job? No. I mean, sales is important in this business. It's nice that you were aware of it. You're not going to have a sales team in a toothbrush manufacturer, but you can talk about sales teams in pretty much any business that has salespeople. So, nice issue to bring up, important issue to bring up, as many of the issues that did not pass the toothbrush test in this case, in this framework, but does not pass, is not specific enough to differentiate yourself. And one thing to notice, you don't have to have all the issues passing the toothbrush test score. I mean, just having 40 to 60% is enough, and you can just bring the other issues in a generic way, no problem. Will our cost structure allow us to be competitive? I'll let you guess that, and the answer is, of course, no. So again, not a lot of insight to the table, not a lot of specificity, but important issue to bring up as well. If your cost structure cannot allow you to be competitive, then you should not enter this market. Now, this is a structure with a toothbrush test score of 40%, so it's roughly what you want. Perhaps a little bit more specificity would be okay. I think this structure would actually impress the interviewer because of the art part. There's so much insight on the airline business, schedules, types of maintenance, contracts and licenses, things like that. So the art part here makes this 40% be worth actually a little bit more. But you don't need to know all these specific things. What you need is to give examples. What you need is to explain what you're doing. What you need is to bring up issues that only make sense in this industry. Now, if you want to see a framework that scores 90% on the TTS, so that you can see what a top performance looks like, then check on my website, craftingcases.com/toothbrush. It's the original article that I wrote a few months ago on this technique, and you can read there, you can read analysis, and these two frameworks are also there so that you can learn a little bit more about them. Also, I'm going to be making a video on me changing a mediocre structure into a very strong one. And one of the techniques that I use is this one. I make the issues more specific. I'm going to put the link of that video on the screen. And also, there are two other techniques that I use in that video to make the structure stronger, which are the techniques that I mentioned in the video on the 3 shifts to quickly make our frameworks more powerful and much, much better. Now, before I finish this video, some question and answers here that bring a lot of concern to people. So 4 questions and answers that may alleviate some concern on using this. First, straight from the comments in our original article at craftingcases.com/toothbrush. I guess that in order to make a good structure, one must know about various industries. My fear is that by making a structure that is too specific, I end up forgetting something important. If you're generic and not specific, then you're forgetting everything that's important. So I believe that this feeling of riskiness is true. I also felt that as a candidate, but that shouldn't stop you to be more specific. So one way to deal with it and to mitigate this risk is to say the generic thing first and then say a few specific things that I would look at are this, this, and this. So for example, I'd look at barriers to entry. A few that come to mind are this, this, and this, which is exactly what I did in my examples, in my second example with the 40% TTS. So don't use this as an excuse not to be specific, because if you're generic, then you're not saying anything of value. Question number 2. Doesn't it take too much time to present your framework when you're so specific? Yes, in the beginning, but that shouldn't stop you from being specific, because the biggest time waste there is to be so generic that you're going to be rejected. You're going to be wasting your time, you're going to be wasting your interviewer's time. So with time, as you practice being more specific, you will be able to judge what specific things are the most important to say and which issues, which bullet points to leave generic and which ones to be specific about. Of course, in the other example, I extended a lot my answers just to explain to you each point and give several examples of specific things to mention. But you don't need to do that in your interviews. You can become more time efficient as you practice this. But in your mock case interviews, I suggest you not to worry too much about time. Even if you take 10 minutes to present your framework, it's better to take time and have a good job done than to try to be quick at first and be so generic that you're going to be rejected anyways. You're going to be wasting an hour of you, an hour of your interviewers, of the firm that's interviewing you. Not a nice situation to be in. Question number 3. I just did an interview at McKinsey, at Bain, at BCG, but I don't know the TTS of my structure. Should I be concerned? Now, the Toothbrush Test Score is something that Julio and I have developed to help you improve during your practice. Your interviewer probably has never heard this term before. They're probably not measuring, oh, he said 5 specific issues and 6 generic issues, so I'm not gonna pass them. That's not what's going on in their mind. We've developed this test because we've noticed that a lot of candidates are generic when they say things, and almost every consultant, when they say things, they're pretty specific. They give examples. They say specific terms from an industry. And if you notice the way they speak, you're gonna notice that too. So this is a tool for you to practice and improve, not for you to assess whether you did well in a real case or not. Question number 4. What if my case is on the toothbrush industry? Well, then you can use the SBTS, or the Steel Bars Test Score. Just kidding. So the point of this test is to know if the issues, the way you phrased your issues, are specific enough so that they couldn't be used in a completely different industry. And sure, if your case is on the toothbrush industry, you can compare it with a steel bar industry case or something completely different. The point is, you should be specific to that industry. And actually, in the original article in our website, the 90% TTS structure, I did it on purpose on the hair care industry because it's an industry that's so similar to the toothbrush industry in many aspects that you need to be very specific. But some issues can be similar to the toothbrush industry because then the important thing is so you're not similar to a case on the steel industry or the mining industry or the automotive industry. Now, here's some next steps for you to implement this into your case practice. Now, what I suggest you to do is, if you tend to write down the cases that you do in a notebook, and if you don't, you should be doing that. But if you tend to do that, get the last 3 to 5 cases that you've solved and try to score your TTS in those cases. Now, there's one nuance that is important, and that is that what's important is how you communicated the bullet point. In a real interview, you don't want to waste your time writing the issues with all the details because you waste too much time with that. It's okay to just write down the generic thing and say the specifics when you communicate. So if you've written down the generic version and you're not sure if you said in the specific way, then you can score your next 3 frameworks, and then you could record your communication of those frameworks. You can record your cases, so you can do that. But the important thing is to get 3 to 5 cases, score your TTS, your Toothbrush Test Score, and see how insightful, how specific you were in those cases. If you've scored consistently below 40%, then you should be working on being more specific. Now, if your score is consistently above 40% or even better, above 60%, then you shouldn't worry too much about it. You can go on to look for other things to improve on, but it's still nice to be aware that being specific is a way to generate insight to show business sense. And if you are pretty specific, you're sure being pretty specific, and you still got a feedback on insightfulness, on business sense, only then you should work on the art part. Now, if you really want to improve your TTS or your case interview skills in general, I think you'll love our free course on the fundamentals of case interviews. There you'll find through different techniques and practice examples exactly how to make your structures more specific, more insightful, and thus how to really stand out from other candidates. In the practice examples, I'm going to show you, Julio and I actually are going to show you the specific issues that are really important for each specific case or framework so that you can learn how to really think like a top management consultant. That's the only way to really get an offer or to maximize your chances of getting an offer. To get access now, just visit craftingcases.com/free course. I'll be there waiting for you. Overall, if you've liked this video, hit the like button and hit subscribe. This is cool for us, and I guess for you as well, but it's cool for us because it lets YouTube know that the content was useful, and it makes our algorithm show this video to more people who are looking for case interview content. Also, if you want to get notified when we launch a new video, for example, the videos that I've mentioned in this one, just hit the alarm bell button so YouTube will send you an email every time we launch a new video. Also, tell me in the comments how you're going to use the toothbrush test to help you make your structures more insightful, to help improve your business sense, or to improve your case interview skills in any other way that I haven't thought of. I hope you really liked this video, and I'll see you in the next one.